Hello and welcome to today's lesson. Today I would like us to learn about math in Java, or the math class in Java, and how you can do various operations using the math class. For instance, finding out the maximum of two numbers, minimum of two numbers, finding square roots, cube roots, logarithms, rounding up numbers or rounding down numbers, and so on and so forth. So let's begin. We are going to start with the minimum and maximum. So to find out these, given two numbers, let's say 5 and 10, how can we find out which one is the minimum and which one is the maximum programmatically using Java? So I'm going to define an integer variable called int max, and we are going to use the math.max function that takes in two numbers that's going to compare and return to you which one of the two is the maximum. That is the max function. So I'm going to give it 10 and 5. So given 10 and 5, our program should tell us which one is the maximum of the two. Of course, we know it's 10, and we expect our program to tell us that 10 is the maximum between 10 and 5. So we would like to print out that result, and so let's use the concatenation operator. Max equals to the max variable, whatever is stored in that max variable. So let's run. So we expect it to give us 10. Very good, and tells us that the maximum between 10 and 5 of the two values, 10 and 5, is 10. So let's go to the second function, and the second function is the math.min function. It basically, given two numbers or given two natural numbers, it's going to give you the minimum of the two. So I'm going to define an integer value, int min, and we are going to apply the math.min function to find out which one of the two is the minimum number. So I'm going to compare 15 and 18. So it should give us the minimum number. So let's print it out. System out.println. I think I made a typo there. So what's the mean number? The mean number should of course be 15. So that's what we expect our program to give us. Yes, so mean number is 15. Very good. So for the output, I hope you know, and of course you can see from the program, we are using different inputs. That's why it's giving us different outputs. So for the mean between 15 and 18, mean is of course 15. So let's learn another method, and in this case we're going to be learning about handling floating point numbers or numbers with decimal places. And for numbers with decimal places, what you might want to do with them from an arithmetic perspective or from a mathematical perspective, you might want to round them up, round them down, or just round them to the nearest integer or the nearest whole number. So let's find out how we can be able to do that. So the first thing that you can be able to do that is to round up. Rounding up simply means that, for instance, given a floating point number, let's say 4.7 or let's say 4.2, it means that you're going to round it upwards to the nearest integer or to the nearest whole number. Rounding down means that given a floating point number, let's say 4.7, you're going to round it down to the nearest whole number or to the nearest integer. It doesn't matter whenever by the rules of rounding off, whether because it's 4.7 that the nearest is the 5. No, it doesn't matter. Whenever you are rounding up, it always goes to the nearest highest integer because you're rounding up. Please take note of that. Whenever you're rounding down, it goes to the nearest lowest integer. So let's find out. The two methods that you use for either rounding up or rounding down are called ceiling and floor. I think they just mirror whatever you are doing. So let's find out int ceil, short for ceiling. and we are going to use a function called math.ceil. It takes in a double, so we are going to give it a number 4.2 for illustration. This method returns a double, so our variable should also be a double. So let's print out and find out what this gives us whenever we run our program. So that is for the ceil function. So whenever we run the ceil function on a number 4.2, it gives us 5.0. Please note that whenever we run the ceil function, it doesn't give us 4, it gives us 5 because it's rounding up. It gives us a ceiling of that number, and the ceiling of that number is basically the nearest biggest integer. So let's also explore the floor function, and basically the floor function is the opposite of the ceiling function. And what does that? It gives you the lowest or the smallest nearest integer. So we define a double variable called floor, and we're going to use the math.floor function. So what we are still, let's use a number like 4.7, and the floor function should return to us a number that is the nearest, the lowest. We concatenate with our variable, whatever is stored in our variable. Run the program. So this should give us 4. Yes, so the floor is 4. So let's learn about something else, about finding out, let's say, the roots. You would want to find out the square root of a number, the cube root of a number, and so on and so forth. So let's find out those functions. So let's start with something like the square root. So I'm going to define a double variable called square root, sqrt, and we have a math function called sqrt. Let's find out the square root of, let's say, a number like 100 for simplicity. So we want to find out what is the square root of 100. Let's print it out. So to find out the square root, of course, as you have seen, we've used the sqrt function. It gives us the square root of a number, sqrt. Let's find out. Yes, and the square root of 100 is 10. So that's how you use the square root function. We also have another function called the cube root. It's written as cbrt. So I'm going to define a double variable, find out the cube root of a number. Cube root of a number, let's say I want to find out the cube root of 64, of the number 64. What's the cube root? So let's print it out. Let's print it out. Cube root of 64. Yeah, so the cube root of 64 is 4, and that's correct. So the other thing that you may want to learn is how do you find the power of two numbers. For instance, the exponential, let's say 2 raised to power 3 should be 8, and so on and so forth. So how do you do that? We're going to define a double variable, let's call it power, and we are going to use a math function called the math.power, POW, and takes two parameters. One is the one number, so I'm going to give it, let's say 2, and the other number that I'm going to give it is 3. So basically to mean 2 raised to power 3. Let's find out what it gives us. System.out.println. These are very helpful functions whenever you are doing your programming, and basically because they are already available in Java, there's no need to redefine them, and it's very good to know them and understand that they are there so that you do not reinvent the wheel. So let's run our program and find out. Of course, the math class has very many functions, just like the string class and other Java classes. So we just highlight the most commonly used ones. So the power between 2 raised to power 3 is of course 8, and that's what the program gives us as a result, which is very good. I think one function that I should cover is the absolute function and also the round function for your clarity. So how do you round off a number? So we studied the ceiling function and the floor function, but we have not yet covered the rounding of a number. So let's say you have a number like 4.5. How do you round it either up or how do you round it off? Now in this case, not the ceiling or the floor, but how do you round off the normal way that we know? So I'm going to define a variable double round. Let me just say round off. And we have a function in the math class called round. So we are going to we want to round off let's say 4.5. So when we round off 4.5, I'm sure you already know the answer. Let's find out what Java tells us. System out.println. We concatenate. By now, I'm sure you have already gotten very used to the concatenation operator and what we are doing here, and you should be enjoying it. So we are finding out what our program or what Java tells us is the rounding off result of a number like 4.5. So whenever we round, it tells us that the result is 5.0, which is expected. What about if we were rounding off something like 4.2, which we expect to give us 4? Let's find out what it does for us. Yeah, of course, it gives us 4.0, which is very correct. The other method that I would like us to learn is the absolute method or the absolute function in the math class. And basically the absolute function in the math class, what it does that from a negative number, it gives you its absolute number. For instance, if you had a number like negative 4.2, whenever you run the absolute function on it, it should give you 4.2, positive 4.2. And why is this important? Sometimes you're going to do calculations or arithmetic within your program, and let's say you want to calculate the age of a person, and let's say depending on the inputs, it gives you negative. Obviously, nobody has a negative age, so you would want to return the absolute value of that. So I'm going to define a value double absolute equals to math.abs. That's the function that we are going to use. So let's say we want the absolute of negative 7.2. What is the absolute of that number? Let's find out. So we have system.out.println. So that is the absolute. Very important function here. You're going to find it very useful, especially when you're writing real programs, because I'm sure you're going to encounter a scenario where you perform some subtraction and you get a negative, but your intended answer was not a negative, or it's not logical to have a negative answer. So the absolute figure for negative 7.2 gives you positive 7.2. Very important. The other one that I would like us to learn is the math.random function, and basically the math.random function gives you random numbers between 0.0 and 1.0. between 0, basically between 0 and 1. That is the math.random function. And this one is also a very useful function because in many times you're going to find scenarios in your programming where you expect to get a random number or to randomize some results, and it comes in very, very handy. So I'm going to define a double. I'm going to define a double, and I'm going to call it double random equals to math.random. So whenever I run the math.random function on the math.random function, as we have said, I expect it to give me a random number between 0 and 1. And of course, if it is between 0 and 1, they are basically floating point numbers. Could give you 0 0.1, 0 0.55, and so on and so forth. So we want to print out. We would like to. Sorry, I'm using the wrong method here. I should use println. So random, append with the random. Run the program. Let's find out what it gives us. So of course we know what we are expecting, a number between 0 and 1. So yes, so when we run the random function, it gives us 0.670019, and of course to a number of decimal places. Let's run it again, and it's going to give us another randomized number. It's going to give us another randomized number. So this time round it gives us 0.95. Run it at that time, it's still going to give you another randomized number. 0.30. So what let's say you wanted to get a random number, not now between 0 and 1, but you would like it to be between 0 and 100. How do you do that? Of course, because it's giving you numbers between 0 and 1, let's say 0.3, 0.55, all you would need to do is to multiply that with 100. And I believe that's simple enough because we have learned about the multiplication operator. So these are the basic math functions that I wanted us to learn. There are many, many more. For instance, to calculate logarithms, the trigonometric functions, they are also there. But these are the ones that you are going to be interacting with commonly. If you want to learn more about the other math methods, you can check out the Java math reference. So thank you very much. Let's keep learning and see you in the next video. Thank you.